third graders, this is Mrs. Strammert, and you are logging on to your science lesson number 2, your second science lesson. So this week we're going to be talking about climate and how that relates to the learning we did last week with weather. Alrighty. So today's lesson objectives. Students will show understanding of climate by choosing a climate to research and then describe that climate. So what is climate? Well, climate refers to the patterns of weather in a certain region. So your lesson we did last week, we studied certain patterns of weather when you recorded your highs and your lows and what patterns you saw. Well, climate is the patterns over a long length of time. So not just a couple weeks, but years. So, and then when it refers to regions, it's talking about a large location on the surface of the earth. So when we talk about our regions of the United States, there's the West region, the South region, the Northeast region, and then the Midwest. And hopefully you know where Iowa is on this map and you know that we live in the Midwest. So there's 4 major climate types. Polar, areas in the far north or far south of the world that gets very little sunlight and is cold year round. So I'm sure you've seen the movie Polar Express or the North Pole, the South Pole. It's very far north or very far south that's dark almost all of the time and is cold almost all of the time. Desert, those are areas that receive very little or no rain and might be hot or sometimes could be cold. So I'm sure you've heard the word desert before. It's when there's no rain. Tropical, areas near the equator that get lots of rain and is warm year round. So when I think tropical, I think like Mexico or the beach or Brazil or an exotic location that's always beautiful because it's always green, they get so much rain and it's always warm. And then last we have temperate, areas like North America, that's where we live, and Europe with warm summers and cold winters. So when you think about Iowa, our weather, our climate, is temperate. So we have warm summers and cold winters. So what weather patterns do we see that could be used to describe Iowa's climate? So if I was going to describe the climate here in Iowa to somebody, so the patterns that we see over time, what could I tell them? Well, I could tell them that we have some very cold temperatures in the winter. The winter temperatures average around 14 degrees in January. And I could also tell them that we have snowfall. We have light snowfall. It doesn't always stick around forever like places in the far north though. Usually we have it and then it'll melt after a little while and then it might snow again and it'll stick around for just a little bit and then it'll melt after a little while. So not a ton of snowfall, but it snows every winter. So another way I could describe Iowa's climate is it's also hot in the summer. The summer temperatures average around mid-80s in July. And it's also humid. So there's lots of moisture in the air, which is why you might get sweaty more often in the summer because of the humidity, the moisture in the air. And that's why your hair gets frizzy if you're a girl. So why is all these things important to know? Why do we care about climate? Well, people might choose where to live based on their preferred climate. If you're somebody who likes the really warm weather, you might want to be living in the tropical climate. If you're somebody who likes the cold and the warm, that's how I am. I like it when it gets cold, and then I appreciate the warm even more. I like the temperate weather we have here in Iowa. Also, when constructing buildings and homes, you need to know what weather conditions might damage the homes if you don't use the right material. Sorry, that word got cut off on my slide. So if the home was going to be exposed to lots of rain, like in a tropical climate, you would want to make sure that you're using the right materials that can handle all of that moisture, all of that water. If you know the home is going to be in a very cold location, you want to make sure that you have really good pipes where they're not going to freeze on you. And in addition, when we think about climate, we might notice changes in climate. So this next slide might be something you've heard of before. So, global climate change, also known as global warming. I'm sure you've heard this buzzed around before. So, global climate change or global warming refers to the average long term changes over the entire Earth. So, when we're noticing long term, so not just a couple weeks, but long changes, they're noticing the patterns that are happening. So, this includes we're noticing the temperatures are getting warmer, warming temperatures. There's changes in precipitation, as well as the effects of the Earth's warming, such as there's rising sea levels. The seas are higher than ever before. The mountain glaciers are shrinking because the temperatures are warming up. Ice is melting at a faster rate than usual, especially in Greenland, Antarctica, and Antarctic. And then we're noticing some changes in flowers and plant blooming time. So when the flowers start to bloom in the spring. So when you hear about global climate change or global warming, now you kind of know what it's referring to. So that's why it's important for meteorologists to be tracking those weather changes over long periods of time, to be tracking the climate so we can notice things like this. If nobody ever took the data, we wouldn't know that this was happening. So now that you've learned about climate, your task is going to be to choose a climate and research it and describe it using this brochure. So it's almost like, here is a brochure that tells you about my climate. Do you want to come live here or not? It's going to tell you an all about type of page thing. So here's what the first page looks like. What is your climate? So again, there you had 4 choices. You had temperate, which is what we have here in Iowa, where you have the warm and the cold. You have tropical, when it stays warm all of the time. You have polar, and then what? Oh, you have desert. So those are your 4 choices. So you're going to write which one you chose, and then where on Earth is your climate located. So you're just going to want to color in on that map there all of the different places that have that climate. So shaded in is what it says. And then write down, you don't have to write down all the countries, but just some of them that have your climate. So choices. What kind of animals live there? Depending on what climate is going to be what type of animals. So probably not going to find a polar bear here in Iowa. They need the polar climate. What kind of plants can grow there? What's the weather like? So remember, climate is the long term. Weather would be like, what would an average day be like? Would it be rainy that day? Would it be hot that day? What is an average thing? What's average going on in the atmosphere at that time? What would you wear if you lived there? 3 interesting facts about that place or that climate, and then you can draw pictures of your climate or animals. So that would be like, if you chose polar, you'd draw some snow and some polar bears, or if you chose tropical, you might draw some palm trees, that type of thing. Okay. So good luck researching. The links will be provided in the weekly lesson plan document, like always. And remember, you don't have to print these if you don't want to. If you don't want to waste the ink, you could draw these things out on any paper you have at home to record your research. All right, well, I hope you learned a little bit about climate and that added to your learning about weather from last week. Thanks for logging on, guys. I'm going to exit, stop sharing, and say goodbye. Bye, everyone.